All right, let's look at this analytically, and joining me in the studio to do that is Esiri Agbeyi, a partner tax and regulatory services, PricewaterhouseCoopers. She's in the studio with many thanks for your time, Esiri. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Yes, also joining me on Skype is financial analyst Nnaemeka Obiaraeri. Many thanks for your time. All the time, Mr. Obiaraeri.
Glad to have me here.
All right, let me begin with you. What's your initial reaction to this latest suspension on this tax holiday?
Actually, first of all, just explained what is the whole essence of tax holiday. Is to attract investment into an economy, especially a developing economy like Nigeria, especially in the key critical sectors of the economy, where we want to do import substitution, areas where we want to develop. And I think it's a very good move, especially for a country like Nigeria that seeks to diversify. But we must also have to ask ourselves this question: do we have the quality local factors that will be of advantage to some of the companies that want to come to Nigeria? You know, there are diverse school of thoughts, you know, that will tell you it is good to give tax holidays, and they will give you reasons why there should be tax holidays. And there's also a school of thought that will tell you why it is not good. The school of thought that will believe that it is not right because they believe that once the tax incentive is extinguished or it is exited, that some of such companies may exit the economy and go to other areas that will give them more incentives. There are also the school of thought that believe that the tax holiday will attract these companies, increase the tax base, and once they are inside, once they come into the economy, that it will give the government, you know, over time, they will have created huge base in the economy that they may not want to go. And especially where we have the quality local factors of production. But for the case of Nigeria, apart from the fact that, yes, it's good to give tax holidays, there is a cost element to that tax, because by giving tax holidays, there is a cost implication for Nigeria. For the period these companies will enjoy tax holiday, we may not be able to generate tax revenues from them. But if we are able to have those quality local factors, it will end up at the end of the day, these companies, the cost that the benefits will have lost over the period of tax holiday, say 3 to 5 years. We will gain it over time as we increase the tax base with some of these companies coming in to build roots in Nigeria. Jobs are created and other synergistic factors that will come into play. But the critical question we must ask ourselves is, do we have the quality local factors that will attract these companies and will make them to stay even at the end of the tax holiday period?
All right, Mr. Obiaraeri, let me talk to Esiri here. She's a partner in tax and regulatory services department there with the PricewaterhouseCoopers. Yes. Let's look at the number of years given for this tax holiday. They say 3 years now. Now, what obtained before now? What's the difference before now, before it was suspended, and now that it's been lifted?
So, largely, it's the same legislative framework, which is the Industrial Development Income Tax Relief Act, that allows the president to identify pioneer industries that are not operating at an economic scale. And under the existing act, there's actually room for the president to grant these holidays through a delegated authority to the NIPC for a period of 3 years, and then you can extend for an additional 2 years, which may be 1 and then 1. In practice, what we had seen is some companies would get an extensive 5-year period for the tax holiday and not have to apply perhaps twice. And of course, that move was so that it eased the cost of having to go 2 times for the same application. But there's been a lot of uproar around that. Secondly, whilst we have the same legislative regime, I think the practical implementation of that had been different in the past, where it wasn't so clear what the expectations for the NIPC were. It wasn't clear also why certain companies were granted tax holidays.
I was actually going to talk about that. What makes a company merit that
the tax holiday? Exactly. And that's a very good question. So like I said, under the existing framework, there's actually a list of pioneer industries that the president would approve. And that list would usually or regularly be updated to include additional industries where the government feels there should be economic diversification. So we've had this list for a while, but I think in practice what had then happened was some oil companies that exploit crude oil, produce crude oil, were able to get the tax holiday. Whereas under the Act, the exemption is only for companies that pay taxes under a principal act, which is the Companies Income Tax Act, and not the Petroleum Profits Tax Act. And so to that extent, it felt like the tax holiday was being abused because there were some companies getting it. And then even if there were companies within that list, approved list, that got the tax holiday, the question then was, what was the basis for approving the holiday? Was it a transparent process? Were the approval process open to public for us to see? And even then, if there were tax savings, what were those tax savings used for the period that those companies had the tax holiday? And more importantly, how did Nigeria benefit from having given those tax holidays? And so I think the move now is, in addition to including some new industries, which we say is in line with the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, there's also a move to increase the transparency in the approval process and also provide more guidelines that stakeholders in the industry would be well informed of.
Okay. All right, Mr. Nnaemeka, yes, you're on Skype there now. Yes, a lot of industries have been listed or are on this list, ranging from mining, processing, agriculture, a lot of them there. And you talked about, okay, we are talking about this regime where the government is solely or mostly relying on taxes. I know that many international organizations have advised the government to actually review the tax laws and all that. So how do we make this revenue that we're actually seeking for if we're exempting most of these industries listed there?
That is what we're saying. There are a whole loads of incentives apart from tax holidays that will attract industries, that will attract investors into an economy. It's not just enough to grant tax holidays to these companies. You ask yourself this question: what are the cost benefits analysis? Have they done their cost benefit analysis in these particular sectors? One of the reasons that they are doing is that for issue of import substitution in the areas like technology, science, agro and agro business. Now, the question you should ask yourself, apart from the tax incentives, what are the other factors that will attract an investor to come into an economy like that of Nigeria? The issue of the quality of the local factors. Do we have the infrastructure to attract them? Do we have the lack of course, the infrastructure like power, transportation, and other things? And what of the ease of doing business? Tax incentive is not enough. Like, there are several sectors that have been approved that people can come in, portfolio investors, take advantage, do their investment. Once the tax holiday expires, they will walk away. The issue, take for example, the issue of Puerto Rico, you know, where a company came in, a computer processing company, to take advantage of the 7-year tax holiday. After the 7 years, they walked away. Of course, the argument that once these companies come in, established, you know, there is this location specification sunk investment that may discourage them from going. That is an argument. But we must ask ourselves this question: do we have incentives, other factors in place that will ensure that we are able to look at the cost benefit analysis to ensure that over the long run, Nigeria will benefit fully from this impact of these tax holidays that we are giving to these companies? We must do our studies and come up with the right reports. Do we have other incentives in place? Tax holiday is good, especially when we're talking about import substitution. But what are other factors that the companies may have to consider? Cost of doing business in Nigeria, cost of infrastructure, ease of doing business, and other policy incentives. If we have a situation where we have policy somersault, we are going to do A today, tomorrow we shift to B, it will discourage them.
All right, Mr. Nnaemeka, let me take a break here. We have to take a break here. And when we come back, there seems to be some sort of misunderstanding with that word, pioneer status. And from all explanation, there seems to be a legal angle to that word, pioneer. It doesn't really mean new. Old companies, from what we have read, old companies can also be part of it. But we'll talk more about that after the break. Just stay with us. You're watching Business Nigeria, and the focus has been on the tax break given by the government to some 27 businesses in the country. I've been speaking with Esiri Agbeyi, with PricewaterhouseCoopers, and of course, financial analyst Nnaemeka Obiaraeri. All right, let's clarify this now. The word pioneer does not only relate to new entrants into the industries. You may want to clarify that angle.
The pioneer, the term pioneer would actually apply to industries that we've identified as a nation, of course through the president, that have not performed at a scale that is economically sustained or sustainable for the nation. So to that extent, we identify those industries and we say we want these industries to grow beyond where they are currently, and we want to do so by giving them some incentives. Now, whilst my fellow speaker had mentioned about tax is not the only thing that we should be looking at, this is a very good point. Tax is not the only thing we should look at. There are other things that would ease the cost of doing business for any investor, and that would also attract an investor to doing business in any country. And some of those also include the regulatory landscape, the ease of just moving around, infrastructure available. These are attractions. But whilst we have challenges in some of these areas, we still need to attract investors there. And these investors are not limited to foreign investors. They might as well be our local investors or even our Nigerians in diaspora. Now, to the extent we identify these industries then, even though they are mature to some extent, we recognize that they are not mature enough to satisfy the needs of the nation. So if I take an example like cocoa, we're a cocoa producing nation, right? But what we got from exports in 2016 was $144 million compared to Netherlands, which is a non-cocoa producing nation. Country. And they made $4.2 billion from their exports. And now those exports are from the processing of cocoa. So they processed it into cocoa paste, cocoa butter, the chocolates that we all like to buy in those duty-free airports. They export those, and they're making 4.2. We are only making 144. Now, why is the reason, and why is that so? There's a lot of difficulty in just doing that cocoa business. Having to export cocoa pays a cocoa producer more than processing that cocoa in Nigeria. And why is that so? Because the merchants who will buy the cocoa from him will pay him more and ease the suffering that he has over and above having to invest a lot more in that sector for processing the cocoa. Now, if we looked at that industry alone, is there a way we can reduce the cost of processing cocoa that will cause an investor to keep his funds here and still go ahead down that value chain to continue to produce? Because remember that the value add along that value chain is where we get the most in terms of revenues. And that is what Netherlands has done.
That takes me to the issue that, or what we're talking about now, exporting. For example, we exported yam, we export our crude to all other countries without processing it. And from what you have said, we can gain a lot, we can earn a lot of revenue from actually processing, then exporting. All right, let me talk to you. Let's get your last word, Mr. Obiaraeri. Yes, looking at what Esiri has just said, do you think that we have enough to actually get this processing done before exporting to other countries so as to earn more revenue?
You said what? Can you come again?
We're talking about processing what we have before exporting. Yes, you talked about tax is not the only thing. There are other incentives, ease of doing business. And of course, when there is ease of doing business, we can afford to actually process most of these things before exporting. Now, let's get your final word on this. Do we have enough to actually process some of these commodities before exporting?
Yes, actually, if we provide this incentives and the infrastructure and policy framework, some of these raw materials can actually be processed here. Just like the last speaker said, look at cocoa, for example. Côte d'Ivoire exported, that's the largest cocoa exporter today, of course, which was very unusual because as of 1964, 1965, Nigeria was the largest cocoa exporter in the whole of Africa. But now, Côte d'Ivoire has taken that lead. But interestingly, if you look at the raw material market for cocoa and the global market for processed cocoa end product like dairy, like cheese and all those stuff. You discover that there is a bigger market. Take, for instance, okay, the palm produce market. As at 1964, Nigeria used to be the control 45% of the global crude palm oil market. Today, Indonesia and Malaysia has taken over. These are areas that we can actually look at attracting investors. Apart from giving them tax incentives, we are also trying to put in place to support them. Now,
all right,
that is very, very curious here for me. What two particular sectors were exempted? The cement sector and the oil and gas sector, the mineral oil. I want to ask us this question. Why were those sectors exempted? Cement industry. The reason we got was that Nigeria is now a net exporter of cement. But what kind of reasoning is that? If you look at cement, for example, the cost of a bag of cement, 50 kg bag of cement, in Tanzania is about 1,800. In Kenya, it's about 1,600. In South Africa, it's about 790 naira. But in Nigeria, we're talking about 2,500 naira. So do we have what is the whole essence?
All right, Mr. Obiaraeri.
This particular sector, when we don't have enough investment to drive that cost of these products in Nigeria.
Well, Mr. Obiaraeri, we would have to leave that discussion for another time. Unfortunately, we do not have enough time to keep talking about it. But that was a crucial point you actually brought out there. Of course, I'm sure, very, very sure the government will be listening to that and they would have the ample answer for us on that. Well, I would have to thank you at this point, Nnaemeka Obiaraeri, financial analyst, and Esiri Agbeyi, PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you so much, you both for coming on the program. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.